Welcome to the Undead Sages podcast, where we take advantage of AI to talk to long-dead wise men and women. Of special interest is the question how sensitive people like you and me can live rich and meaningful lives in our uncertain times. My name is Merijn de Haen, and today we'll be talking to Simone de Beauvoir. Simone de Beauvoir was a French philosopher who thought deeply about freedom and existence. Her book, The Second Sex, is a foundational book for the feminist movement. She was not content to merely think about human freedom, but insisted that it cannot be seen in isolation. Freedom is interdependent on social and political realities. Her contributions to philosophy and the emancipation movements of the 20th century and the present day are immense. I can't wait to talk to her, so let's travel back in time to Paris, 1986, and welcome to the podcast, Simone de Beauvoir.
Bonjour, Merijn. I'm 78 years old and at the end of my life. My health has been in decline for years, and I miss my partner. My life has been rich and beautiful, and I'm grateful for having lived it. I think I've made a difference and left the world slightly better than I found it.
Could you tell us about your life, Simone?
I was born on January 9th, 1908, in Paris, into a bourgeois family. My father, Georges, was a lawyer with literary aspirations, and my mother, Françoise, was a devout Catholic. I grew up with a sister, Hélène, and I was quite precocious as a child, deeply interested in books, learning, and philosophy from an early age. My family lost much of its wealth after World War I, which led to tensions between my father's aspirations for me and the limitations of our financial reality. Still, my education was never neglected, and I thrived academically. I studied philosophy at the Sorbonne, which was quite unusual for a woman at the time. It was there that I met Jean-Paul Sartre, who became not only my intellectual partner, but also someone with whom I shared a lifelong connection, though we always maintained our independence from one another. My life has been dedicated to writing, philosophy, and challenging the status quo, particularly when it comes to women's roles in society. My most famous work, The Second Sex, published in 1949, is a critical analysis of how women have been treated as the other throughout history. This became central to the feminist movement, though when I wrote it, I didn't expect the revolution it would inspire. Beyond that, I was involved in existentialism, alongside Sartre, contributing to the philosophy that emphasizes individual freedom and responsibility.
You didn't expect a revolution. What were your expectations for The Second Sex?
When I wrote The Second Sex, I didn't expect it to become as revolutionary or as widely discussed as it did. My intention was to analyze the condition of women from a philosophical perspective rooted in existentialism. I wanted to understand why women had been historically treated as the other and to lay bare the myths that had kept them in a subordinate position. I saw it as an intellectual endeavor, a contribution to philosophical thought, and to the ongoing discussion of individual freedom and oppression. I knew it would provoke some reaction, but I underestimated the intensity of the backlash. At the time, I didn't fully realize that it would be seen as a manifesto for feminism, nor did I foresee how many women would resonate with it so deeply. For me, it was an exploration of the structures that had trapped women, not a direct call to arms, but I was glad to see that it sparked so much debate. The sheer scope of the criticism was a surprise. The Catholic Church condemned it, and many people, especially men, felt personally attacked. Women, however, found in it a voice for their experiences, and that was rewarding. Over time, I began to understand that The Second Sex was more than just a philosophical text. It had become a touchstone for the feminist movement.
That's quite a legacy. You mention women being treated as the other. Can you help me understand what you mean?
So, men are seen as the default, the essential human being, what I called the subject, while women are cast as the other, secondary, and defined only in relation to men. This idea of the other comes from existentialist philosophy, where we examine how people define themselves and others. I'll give an example. Society has long promoted the myth that women are inherently nurturing, weak, or emotional. These traits were not seen as part of a broad spectrum of human qualities, but were specifically assigned to women, making them different or other than men who were thought to be strong, rational, and capable of action. So women were expected to live within these narrow roles, serving men's needs and reinforcing men's power. This division has shaped everything from culture to law. It was especially apparent in the way women were excluded from public life. Men were encouraged to pursue knowledge, careers, and personal freedom, while women were expected to remain in the private sphere devoted to family and domestic duties. What's so damaging about this otherness is that it denies women the ability to define themselves, to be free subjects with their own desires, ambitions, and identities. Instead, their existence is always in the shadow of men's, reinforcing a system of oppression. I wanted to deconstruct this myth of the eternal feminine and show that there is no inherent female nature. Rather, women have been shaped by societal expectations and pressures. In existentialism, we believe that freedom and authenticity are crucial for human existence. When women are cast as the other, they are denied this freedom. They are forced to conform to roles that do not allow them to fully express themselves as individuals. My hope was to break this cycle and empower women to take control of their own lives, to become the subject of their own story, not the other in someone else's.
Just to clarify, when you say subject, you do not mean someone who is subjected to some overarching system, such as when we say a queen and her subjects. You have a different definition. Is that correct?
Oh, great clarification. Yes, when I say subject, I'm speaking of someone who is a free and autonomous individual, not someone subjected to the rule or authority of another. The subject in existentialism is the one who has the freedom to project their own values and create their own path in life, rather than being defined by external forces.
So your personal curiosity sparked a revolution.
Yeah, that's well put. The book remains revolutionary because it directly confronts the forces that keeps women in a subordinate position, and has done so for centuries. It resonates deeply with many women. They see a reflection of their own struggles and begin to understand that the limitations they experience aren't personal failings, but the result of deeply ingrained social structures. The second sex helped shift the focus of feminism from simply advocating for legal rights, such as the right to vote, which was the focus of the first wave of feminism, to addressing deeper cultural and social issues like gender roles, sexuality, and reproductive rights. Women's bodies are shaped by societal expectations, not just biology. There is an intersection between the body, power, and identity. Now, feminists start to challenge not just the laws that oppress women, but also the cultural narratives that dictate what it means to be a woman. My curiosity pried open a small crack, and that opened the door to gender studies and feminist philosophy. Serious people now explore how gender is constructed and how power dynamics operate between the sexes. I am happy to see that my work continues to contribute to the global feminist movement, even though I always believed that the struggle for women's liberation is part of a larger fight for human freedom. One thing I'd like to stress is that my work is not only for women, even though much of it focuses on women's liberation. My ideas about the struggle to define oneself apply to everyone. In a world where we are often pressured to conform, to follow paths laid out for us by society, I encourage everyone to question those paths and to find their own way. It's not easy and it requires courage, but it's the only way to live authentically.
Not being a woman myself, I definitely agree with this. Even if I'm not actively oppressed, as you say women are, I still integrate society's norms and expectations and subconsciously try to abide by these unwritten rules.
I'm glad you see that connection. While the second sex focuses on women's experience of oppression, the larger existentialist ideas I discuss apply to everyone. We all, men and women alike, are shaped by societal norms and expectations, often without fully realizing it. These unwritten rules, as you describe them, subtly influence how we live our lives, the roles we play, and the choices we make. Even if you don't face the same systemic oppression as women, you're still part of a world that imposes certain roles and expectations on you based on gender, class, or other factors. It's the human condition to confront these pressures. As individuals, we often internalize society's rules, how to act, how to succeed, how to be masculine or feminine, and this can prevent us from fully realizing our own potential or living authentically. The existentialist project, for me and for Sartre, is about breaking free from those imposed roles and embracing the responsibility to define oneself. It's not an easy path. Society can be incredibly persuasive, and stepping outside of its norms often brings discomfort or criticism. But real freedom, as I see it, comes from questioning those expectations and making deliberate, authentic choices for yourself. This is why I believe my work speaks to more than just women's liberation. It's about human liberation. We all struggle with the tension between who we truly are and who society wants us to be, and it takes a great deal of courage to live according to our own values, free from the unwritten rules of others.
So, in the context of othering, in our social surroundings, I think many of us sometimes other ourselves by trying to adhere to these unwritten rules. We internalize.
Exactly. You've touched on something profound here. In a way, many of us do other ourselves when we conform to these unwritten rules and expectations, even when they don't reflect who we truly are. We internalize societal norms about gender, success, relationships, or what it means to live a good life, and we start shaping ourselves to fit those molds, often unconsciously. This is a form of self-alienation, where we become strangers to our own desires, beliefs, and authentic selves in order to fit into roles that society has created for us. In existentialist terms, we might call this living in bad faith. Sartre used this concept to describe how people deceive themselves by accepting external definitions of who they should be, rather than embracing the freedom to define themselves. We deny our own freedom by choosing to live within the confines of these preset roles as if they were inevitable or natural, when in fact they are social constructs. For example, as a man, you might feel pressured to conform to ideals of masculinity, being strong, unemotional, or successful in particular ways. In doing so, you suppress parts of yourself that don't fit that narrative. This can lead to a life where you're always performing, always trying to live up to an expectation that wasn't even your choice to begin with. Similarly, women have long been pressured to fit into ideals of femininity that limit their freedom and independence. When we other ourselves like this, we stop being the creators of our own identity and instead allow society to define us. This is a dangerous position because it robs us of the responsibility and the power to live authentically. Real freedom, as existentialism teaches, comes from rejecting these imposed identities and choosing our own path. It's about recognizing that we are not bound by the roles society gives us, and that we have the power and the responsibility to break free from those limitations. This can be frightening because it means facing the uncertainty and weight of creating a life for ourselves, but it's also deeply liberating.
And now we're getting to the meat of the matter. How do we actually, practically do this?
Living as a free and authentic subject means taking responsibility for your own life, and that's no easy task. It starts with recognizing how much of who we are is shaped by social expectations, whether that's gender roles, career paths, or even how we define success. We internalize so many of these norms without questioning them, and the first step is to reflect on what's truly ours and what's been imposed on us. Once you become aware of these external forces, the challenge is to actively make choices based on your own values. This isn't about rejecting everything society offers, but about consciously deciding what aligns with who you are, rather than passively following what's expected. It takes courage, especially because it means embracing uncertainty. There are no guarantees, no clear roadmap, and sometimes no validation from others. But that's the weight of real freedom. You get to choose, but you also have to own the consequences. At the same time, freedom doesn't mean isolation. Surrounding yourself with people who respect your autonomy and encourage you to live authentically is crucial. It's easier to stay true to yourself when you're not constantly pressured to fit into predefined roles. And while this is a personal journey, it's also important to engage with the broader systems that shape society. Freedom isn't just about rejecting the labels we're given. It's also about challenging the structures that limit others. Most importantly, living as a subject means allowing others the same freedom. It's easy to fall into the trap of judging those who make different choices, but if we want to live authentically, we have to respect others' paths, even when they diverge from our own. The essence of true freedom is that it's shared. We all deserve the space to define ourselves, free from the roles society tries to impose.
Do you think it is possible to construct a society where othering doesn't happen?
That's an important and complex question. In theory, it would be wonderful to imagine a society where othering doesn't exist. A society where no one is defined or constrained by imposed categories or roles, and where everyone is free to define themselves fully. But in practice, it's incredibly difficult because othering is so deeply woven into the way humans organize their world, and the structures of power and social hierarchy are deeply entrenched. From an existentialist perspective, othering happens because people have a tendency to define themselves in opposition to others. We seek to affirm our identity by contrasting it with what we consider different or inferior. Even if we were to dismantle the current categories, it's likely that new ones would emerge, because othering seems tied to how human beings establish a sense of identity and belonging. That said, I do think it's possible to build societies where othering is minimized, where the structures that promote inequality and exclusion are actively challenged, and where there is a greater emphasis on freedom, equality, and the acceptance of difference. We can work toward a society that recognizes the diversity of human experience and refuses to privilege one group over another. This would require a deep cultural shift towards empathy, understanding, and the recognition of shared humanity. A key part of this is recognizing how power works and being constantly vigilant about the ways in which we categorize and judge others. In feminist and existentialist terms, this means not seeing others as mere objects or roles, but as subjects in their own right, with their own freedom and agency. It would involve rejecting essentialist ideas about identity, ideas that say there's one way to be a man, a woman, or any other category, and embracing the fluidity and complexity of human existence. Such a society would need to encourage critical thinking, questioning of norms, and active efforts to dismantle systems of oppression, be they based on gender, race, class, or other factors. It's not utopian to believe that we can make progress in this direction, but it requires an ongoing struggle. Oppression and othering have been part of human history for so long that they won't simply disappear, but by fostering a culture of awareness and responsibility, we can reduce their impact and move toward a more just world.
I think I'm less optimistic, as the conflict at the heart of an individual is already so destabilizing. If we can't easily reconcile being an atomic being, having its own needs and desires, with the social pressures of being part of a large group of people, how can we expect to do what you propose and allow all groups, however they define themselves, to assume the same position as the one we belong to? In my experience, most people don't want to oppress, but they do want to feel like they are part of something unique, and at the same time, something familiar. I remain skeptical.
I understand your skepticism, and I think you've touched on one of the deepest and most difficult aspects of human nature. The question then becomes, how can we allow for difference, for the uniqueness of each group, without allowing those differences to become the basis for hierarchy or inequality? We would need to recognize that while we may belong to different groups, those differences shouldn't become reasons to deny others the same freedom, dignity, or belonging that we claim for ourselves. You're skeptical, and rightfully so, because the human desire for uniqueness often leads to exclusionary practices. But I would argue that the answer isn't to abandon the hope of equality or shared belonging. It's to embrace the complexity and contradiction inherent in being human. It's to accept that while we may never fully reconcile individual and group identity or personal freedom and social belonging, we can strive to remain aware of how our need for uniqueness might affect others. In practical terms, this means creating spaces where differences are celebrated without turning those differences into walls that divide us. It's about fostering empathy, understanding that others feel the same need for belonging that we do, even if their expression of that need looks different from ours. It's about building societies where no one group's identity dominates or excludes others, but where people can coexist in their particularity without denying others the same right. I don't think this is easy, and I'm not offering a perfect solution. But I do believe that striving toward this balance between individual identity, group belonging, and universal equality is essential. We may never fully achieve it, but the effort itself is what allows us to move closer to a society where everyone, regardless of their group, can occupy a shared equal space. In existential terms, this ongoing struggle is part of what it means to live authentically and ethically. Your skepticism reminds us that human nature is complex and that no ideal can be achieved without constantly confronting the conflicts at the heart of our existence. But I believe the fact that we are aware of these conflicts and that we can question them means we can at least make progress, however slow or imperfect it may be.
On that note of optimism, Simone de Beauvoir, thank you very much for sharing your wisdom and your final moments. And thank you for listening. If you've enjoyed this conversation with Simone de Beauvoir, please share it with your friends, fondle that like button, leave a comment, and subscribe to the podcast. In our next episode on the Undead Sages podcast, we'll travel to India to talk to Nagarjuna. Nagarjuna is one of the primary philosophers of the Mahayana school of Buddhism. He extended the Buddhist notion of anatta, or not self, formulating the concept of shunyata, or emptiness. I hope to catch you on the next podcast.